Well, welcome to this special Politics Today, where we'll be discussing the general election. We won't be telling you who to vote for, but we'll certainly be scrutinising the election manifestos of all the major political parties to help you determine who you should vote for. And my special guest on today's programme is Tim Dieppe, Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern. Tim, it's great to have you on Politics Today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And thank you for the work you've done regarding this general election to keep Christians informed and educated, and hopefully we can unpack some of that in the programme. But let me start off with a very important question, I think, that we all need to start. Why is it important that Christians put an X in the ballot box and actually register to vote at this year's general election that takes place on Thursday, the 4th of July?
Yeah, well, this is your chance, really, to make your voice heard, for politicians to hear what you think, and for to make a difference in politics. We live in a democracy. What a blessing it is to be able to live in a democracy where our voices are heard and the politicians are accountable to the people. And this is your chance to make them accountable and to say what you think and to put that cross somewhere where it might make a difference, and to make your voice heard, really, and let the politicians hear your voice. And there's obviously a lot more you can do than just put that X in the box as well. There's a lot of prayer that's going on and can be done, and we're doing a prayer rally the night before the election outside Westminster as well. And then also you can question your candidates and email them and question them, go to hustings events and question them. And again, these are all ways to make your voice heard and put the politicians on the spot about the issues that really matter for this nation.
Excellent. And Tim, we will be showing some of the excellent videos you produced going through the election manifestos of the major political parties to see where they stand on the major biblical and moral issues of today. But share with us how, as Christians and viewers and of course voters, how important it is to get away from the media focus, which is on the personality of the leaders, and to look at the manifestos, the programme for government that each of the major political parties represent and have at this year's general election.
Well, the manifestos are quite important because they say exactly what the parties plan to do. These are their policies. There's been a lot of discussion internally amongst the people inside the parties about exactly what they say and exact phrasing and exactly what they're going to promise to do. And these are the things that they're saying to you as voters: we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we promise to do this. And they will be held accountable to it. If one of them gets into government, did you do your manifesto? Are you doing your manifesto? These is what you have voted on, is what the manifesto says. And so it's quite important to look at what the manifestos say, to gauge what the parties stand for, and see where they stand on the key issues that matter to us as Christians.
Excellent. So let's look at the first major political party standing in this general election, and this is the Liberal Democrats, and this is Tim speaking in front of the camera, really analysing the election manifesto of the Liberal Democrats.
So we've been looking at the Liberal Democrat Manifesto and seeing what it has to say about some of the issues that we campaign about here at Christian Concern. And first off, conversion therapy is something that we've been campaigning on for some years and been very concerned about criminalising it. And the Liberal Democrat Manifesto promises, quote, to ban all forms of conversion therapies and practices. This means prayer, for example, offering to pray for somebody who wants to be prayed for about sexual issues and so on could be a criminal offence. Or talking to somebody who wants to have a conversation could be a criminal offence. So we're very concerned about that plan in the Liberal Democrat Manifesto. And then on transgenderism, they want to demedicalise gender transition, which means you would not need any doctor to sign off on changing your gender, basically making it a self-identification. They also will remove what's called the spousal veto, which means if you're married to someone at the moment in law, they can't change gender unless you consent to it. And Liberal Democrat want to remove that, so you can be married to someone and they change gender without you having any say about that. They also want to recognise non-binary identities in law as well. So not just male and female, you'd have non-binary recognised as a legal gender identity, according to the Liberal Democrats. This is all very much against God's plan for us in humanity. And then on abortion, again, they're talking about, let me quote what they say, we want to protect everyone's right to make independent decisions over their reproductive health without interference by the state. Now, I'm concerned that that phrase, without interference by the state, means they want to basically deregulate it and decriminalise it, meaning abortion is just available for anybody right up to birth with no regulations. I mean, we'll see what it means, but that's what it looks like to me. They also talk about enforcing buffer zones around abortion clinics and hospitals as well, so nobody can talk about abortion in those places. And finally, they're also talking about legalising cannabis as well. So these are the things that we think are very damaging for society in the Liberal Democrats manifesto. Just a couple of positive things that we thought, oh yeah, we agree with, we'd support that in the Liberal Democrat manifesto. One is restricting gambling advertising and levying gambling organisations, so they have to pay for some research into it. It's a minor thing, but at least it's something to combat the scourge of gambling in our society. Then on family, the one thing that I thought was actually possibly positive is increasing maternity pay and paternity pay, which just helps support families and enable them to spend time with their children. That's the only thing I could find that actually supports families at all in the Liberal Democrat manifesto. So much, so much to lament and be sorry about and disagree with in the Liberal Democrat manifesto. A few tiny things to sort of be pleased about, but we're so far from what we really want to see in terms of what this manifesto says. So all to pray for and to engage with and to talk to your politicians and candidates about. Thank you.
Good overview there of the Liberal Democrat manifesto. One thing I want to pick up, and I found this actually on the Christian Concern website, which is something that I haven't seen anywhere else, and this is alarming regarding marriage, for example. It says the Liberal Democrats plan to introduce legal recognition of humanist marriages and to allow more choice over how and where weddings take place. They also plan to extend the legal rights to cohabiting couples, which will serve to further undermine and desensitize marriage. So share with us your thoughts on kind of increasing secularization and humanization of marriage.
So I searched through the manifestos for mention of marriage, and this is where marriage turns up in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, as well as celebrating same-sex marriage. They then talk about wanting to allow humanist marriages. So that's kind of a further move away, I suppose, from a Christian origin of how we view marriage. And then also allowing people to celebrate marriages and wherever they want to, which is, we're concerned about that because it kind of like, desacralizes it, or kind of, makes it into something silly. People can have marriages in a silly venue, and it kind of undermines the sanctity and the seriousness of what's taking place, a lifelong vow to commit to someone for life, kind of thing. And then furthermore, giving additional legal rights to cohabiting couples is another way to disincentivize marriage, really, and undermine marriage as an institution. So we're concerned that all these policies would really undermine family and disincentivize family. And we're living in a generation where, for the first time, I think, most people are not married. It's very sad, really, when you think about it in that way, and you think of all the damage and all the harm to children as well, born into unmarried parents and often ending up in single-parent homes and all of that kind of thing. So we think parties should be incentivizing marriage and encouraging marriage and promoting marriage and giving tax incentives and all of that kind of thing, and get rid of cohabitation altogether. Let's just have marriage. But Liberal Democrats are going the other way, I'm afraid.
On the Liberal Democrats, just share with us their position on abortion. Did mention it in the video. Do the other political parties support this position of decriminalising abortion?
Not in their manifesto commitments. I don't think they have done that. I mean, Liberal Democrats say, as I sort of said, they want to get rid of state involvement, and that looks to me like full decriminalisation and full deregulation. And certainly there'll be activists who understand that phrase to mean that. So that seems to be what they want to do. Within the Labour Party, we've had some MPs who have campaigned for decriminalisation and have proposed amendments to the Criminal Justice Bill, for example, to decriminalise abortion, but it's not actually a policy of theirs as such. And Conservative Party, I don't think, mentions it in their manifesto, apart from talking about reproductive rights abroad, which is code for kind of promoting abortion abroad, I suppose.
So let's have a look now and break down the Labour Party's political manifesto and to see what they would do if they win the general election on Thursday, the 4th of July.
Looking at Labour Party manifesto, first of all, they promised to ban conversion therapy. Here's what the manifesto says. Labour will finally deliver a full trans-inclusive ban on conversion practices while protecting the freedom of people to explore their sexual orientation and gender identity. So they go a full trans-inclusive ban, but clearly a caveat there because they recognise that there are free speech issues with banning conversion therapy or conversion practices, because basically it's banning a conversation or banning certain types of consensual conversations. So we don't see how they can do that, how they can square that circle, ban conversion therapy and protect free speech. So we'll see how that works out. On transgenderism, they say, quote, "We will modernise, simplify and reform the intrusive and outdated gender recognition law into a new process." And they say, "We will remove indignities for trans people who deserve recognition and acceptance while retaining the need for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria from a specialist doctor, enabling access to the healthcare pathway." So that's stepping short of gender self-ID, because they want to retain that doctor's sign-off on it, but still saying they want to make it simpler and easier to change gender identity. And so that's clearly something we wouldn't be happy with. They do say that they will implement all the recommendations of the Cass Review, which we would support as well. No mention of abortion or euthanasia in this manifesto, although remember that Keir Starmer did say earlier this year that he would allow time for a vote on euthanasia or assisted suicide when he comes into power. So we'll see what happens there. They do want to introduce VAT on independent schools. We're concerned about this because we're supporting lots of small Christian independent schools that really struggle to make ends meet and try and make the fees very affordable, often have volunteer staff, even volunteer teachers. And adding 20% VAT on top of what they already charge will be very, very difficult for them. Obviously, there's increased demand as well for independent schools and for Christian schools in particular because of sexualisation of children in schools and all of the indoctrination into woke ideology and so on. So we don't support VAT on independent schools. I think the influence of Islam on Labour Party is starting to be seen in Gaza. They talk about an immediate ceasefire and recognising a Palestinian state in their manifesto. That's a manifesto commitment there. Also, they're going to commit to a new Race Equality Act, which sounds fine until you remember that the Labour Party has formally adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia, which defines Islamophobia as a type of racism. And if that's how they define Islamophobia and they're going to do a Race Equality Act, you can expect that definition of Islamophobia to be in law. And that definition does inhibit free speech in relation to Islamic beliefs and practices. So very concerning, because that's basically an Islamic blasphemy law that we could have under a Labour government. There's some things that we welcome here, like a new offence of criminal exploitation of children, 3,000 new nurseries to be provided, reforming gambling regulation, and reviewing parental leave so it better supports working families. So some things to be pleased about, quite a lot to be concerned about, lots to ask your candidates about, and do keep joining us as we pray through this election period. Thank you.
So it was a good synopsis of the Labour Party's political manifesto. Because of time straits, we're having to rush through a lot of these issues. Thankfully, you covered most of them in those excellent videos you produced there, Tim, which is really good. But two issues I think come to mind, particularly thinking that if the polls are correct, then Keir Starmer is going to be our next Prime Minister and the Labour Party are going to win the general election. So what is your concern regarding Christian schools? Because we know that our education system has become so secular that many Christians are taking their children out of schools and getting Christian education. Share with us how this could possibly be threatened under a Labour government.
Yes, well, Labour have been promising to introduce VAT on independent schools for some time. It's a major commitment of theirs. It's something they've spoken about for a long time. But they've got no differentiation between like Eton or Harrow and a tiny school that has like a few dozen pupils that struggles to make ends meet. I mean, I met somebody who runs a school in a little primary school in their church the other day that literally just charges child benefit, and the teachers are all volunteers, and you know they would have VAT imposed on them. And there are other schools that just have many teachers living on minimum wages or just about making ends meet, and a lot of volunteers, a lot of people encouraged to volunteer in the school, trying to keep the fees to an absolute minimum for people to afford them. And 20% VAT is just going to really be very painful and very, very difficult to cope with for those schools. So we would encourage Labour to at least modify their policy and put a kind of, and say, well, if you're charging less than this much, there shouldn't be VAT on that. But it's a very idealistic position for them, so I'm not sure there will be any modification. We'll see if they come to power. There'll be a lot of people who complain about this, a lot of people who say this is unfair and unreasonable and so on. But the idealism there is to put people in state schools, really.
Yeah. And Tim, on Islamophobia, because this is the big kind of game changer, not only for our democracy, but also for the way that we're governed. Share with us your concerns about pushing through legislation that will tackle the issue of Islamophobia. You broke it down very well when we're talking about the Liberal Democrats, but here they're proposing to...
So Labour has also adopted formally, it's in their Code of Conduct, this APPG definition of Islamophobia, which we talked about earlier, and they've got this Race Equality Act promise in their manifesto, and since they define Islamophobia as a type of racism, I think that with the Labour Party you could well see Islamophobia becoming a legal issue, or that legal definition being adopted, and then you'd effectively have an Islamic blasphemy law in this country, and that would be shocking and disturbing, but a lot of the MPs would be supporting that in the Labour Party and want to see that in the Labour Party, and it's very hard for Labour politicians to speak against it because their Code of Conduct says this is what Islamophobia is. And if you criticise it, or if you say something that somebody regards as Islamophobic, you can be suspended or thrown out of the Labour Party. So we already don't really have free speech in relation to Islam when it comes to these parties.
Let's see, Tim, now talking about the Conservative Party manifesto and whether this is good for Christians or not.
Much of what was in the Conservative manifesto has already been announced, but it's good to sort of see what the key points are from our perspective as Christians looking at the moral issues today. First of all, on sex and gender, they say they're going to define sex as biological in the Equality Act, and that's a positive thing. We think that should help. I mean, we would like to go further and stop, cancel the Gender Recognition Act altogether so people don't go and transition gender at all, but at least they're going to define sex as biological in law, and that's a good thing. There'll be one legal sex then across the UK as well, so Scotland and Wales can't go and change that and mess about with that either. They will legislate to ban puberty blockers completely across the country. We welcome that as well, and legislate their gender questioning guidance for schools, which means that you're not forced to use a child's gender identity in terms of pronouns and things, and they should restrict children from changing gender identities at all in schools. We don't think they should be allowed to change at all, but there'll be restrictions there, and that's a good thing. On conversion therapy, an issue we've campaigned quite a lot on, they're saying in the light of the Cass review, which came out just a month or two ago, that they're going to pause and sort of take some time to think what to do about that. So at least they're not making a commitment to ban it. They do describe it as abhorrent. Why is it abhorrent to pray for somebody who wants to be prayed for, or talk to somebody who wants to be talked to about their sexual struggles? But still, we're pleased they're not actually committing to ban it, while they're saying the Cass review raises questions about it, which it really does. So that's interesting to see. On family and education, they're going to make child benefit capped by household rather than by individual income. That's a fairer system. So welcome that household thing, which is pro-family. They're going to ban protests outside schools. We think parents should be allowed to protest against, say, sex education or something like that in schools. So we don't agree with that. They're going to register children that aren't in schools. That's an imposition on homeschooling and kind of increased regulation of homeschooling. So we wouldn't be in favour of that. They're going to legislate so parents can see sex education materials. That's good. We support that. That transparency means parents properly can see what is going on. And they're going to lift the cap on faith schools. So Christian schools can entirely provide for Christians and select according to Christians and so on, and encourage faith schools. So we're pleased about that, and we're proud to be supporting dozens of new Christian school initiatives up and down the country. They'll also legislate to ban mobile phones in schools, which we also think is a good thing as well there. They're going to legislate for a special envoy on freedom of religion and belief, which is probably a good thing to be promoting around the world. They also say they're going to promote reproductive health globally, which generally is tended to mean code for promoting abortion globally, which obviously we would not be in favour of. On assisted dying, they just say they'll respect the will of Parliament. I mean, which is something, but really, they should be saying they don't support legalising euthanasia or assisted suicide, as we would call it, at all. They do say that calls for jihad will be a criminal offence. So some good things that we welcome in there, some not so good things. So much more that could be done to be pro-family and pro-life and supporting human flourishing, but really that's absent in this manifesto. So disappointing. No mention of churches, no mention of Christianity at all in this manifesto. So again, lots to pray for and lots to ask your candidates about when they come and visit you. Thank you.
And Tim, I suppose what stands out the most with the Conservative Party election manifesto is their plans to legislate to bring a role for a special envoy for freedom of religion and belief as a statutory role. This is an important and significant development, isn't it?
Yes, Boris Johnson appointed a special envoy on freedom of religion and belief when he was Prime Minister. He appointed Fiona Bruce to that role, and she's done a great job. And the idea is to make it a statutory role so that any other government would have to have a special envoy on freedom of religion and belief who can promote freedom of religion and freedom of belief all over the world, internationally, in every country. And I think that's a good thing, and I'd like to see that happen. The Conservatives are promising to do it.
I mean, looking at your points you made in that excellent video, looking at the notes on Christian concern, it sounds very good from a Christian biblical perspective, the Conservative Party manifesto. However, the reality is something very different, considering that the Conservative Party have been in power for the past 14 years, and they haven't been exactly Christian friendly, have they?
Well, now we've been in a situation where more and more Christians are losing their jobs and street preachers getting arrested and losing freedom of speech, and and massive demonstrations outside Parliament and all of this kind of thing going on. And it all seems to have really got worse, society, in the 14 years that they've had in power, which is why many people have lost trust in them, lost faith in them. So yes, really concerning about where things would go.
So let's see now what the Reform UK propose in their election manifesto were they to form the next government.
Looking at Reform's contract with the people, which they call it, rather than calling it a manifesto. Lots of content in quite a small document relative to the other parties. On family, they're proposing marriage tax allowance up to 25% transferable. That's a massive incentive of marriage and benefit to marriage and families. So something we'd be very pleased to see. Also, front-loading child benefit so that people can choose to stay at home with their very young children. Again, supportive of family. They also want to push child-friendly app-restricted smartphones for kids and launch an inquiry into social media harms. They talk about stopping child grooming gangs as well, and some new offences around that. So good stuff on family. No mention of abortion or euthanasia or even conversion therapy either in this manifesto. They're just not things that Reform is talking about there. On education, they want to ban transgender ideology across all schools, which is very much something we'd like to see. They also talk about schools having single-sex facilities and also public buildings and changing rooms as well being single-sex. They're going to keep VAT exemption on independent schools, but also have a tax relief of 20% on independent school fees. We're supportive of that because we're supporting lots of small independent Christian schools that are really trying to struggle to make ends meet, often have volunteer staff and teachers, and try and make the fees as affordable as possible. And so that this is encouraging to see this kind of tax benefit for independent schools. And so we would support that. Talk about as well a patriotic curriculum in all schools as well. Free speech is a big issue for Reform. They want to do a comprehensive free speech bill in which they say there'll be no more debanking, no more cancel culture, and stopping Sharia law as well. Many of our cases are about free speech, people who have expressed their beliefs in the workplace or on social media and then been cancelled or lost their job or their career as a result. So we would very much be in favour of robust free speech laws. We've also had a Christian organisation have its bank account removed as well. So scrapping the ability of banks to cancel you over your views would be a good thing as well. We also talk about cutting funding to universities that undermine free speech and changing the definition of a hate crime so it's not perception based as it is now. On foundations, generally no mention of Christianity, no mention of church either in this document, which is a shame because an earlier version did talk about Christian values. They do criticise multiculturalism in this document. And then some quite big constitutional reforms like proportional representation voting for the House of Commons and reforming the House of Lords and the civil service as well, leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and introducing a British Bill of Rights, quite big changes those. And then a new offence of substantial possession of drugs, which should be good in tackling drugs, and scrapping diversity, equality and inclusion roles as well. So a lot to welcome in here, a few things to be slightly questioning about. A shame they're getting rid of Christian values or omitting Christian values in their plenty to ask your candidates about, and do keep praying with us through this election period as well. Thank you.
Tim, I suppose when we look at the election manifesto of Reform UK, what strikes you most is their desire to protect freedom of speech above all. Just share with us their position on protecting free speech and ensuring that people are not cancelled by banks who disagree with their politics.
Well, yes, this has been a big issue. There's been a number of people who've had bank accounts closed, including at least one or two Christian ministries as well, because it's deemed politically incorrect, or the bank just decides. And so Reform wants to make it that you have to, you can't just close a bank account for political reasons. And I think that's a good thing. And they're generally very pro-free speech and keen to introduce legislation to defend free speech. And that would help Christians who are losing their jobs for expressing their Christian beliefs or being arrested on the streets for preaching the gospel. So we support much stronger protection for freedom of speech in this country, yes.
And also the big other policy announcement they want to do is bring about constitutional reform, reforming our political system to proportional representation, and then also the reform of the civil service and the House of Lords. I mean, that's a huge task for any government. Share your thoughts.
It's a big deal, and I think there is some constitutional reform needed, but I think we risk sort of further moving away from our Christian heritage as we jettison a whole load of things that were set up originally with Christian ideas behind them. So yes, it's quite radical change that Reform is proposing there. I think Lib Dems and Labour also want to reform the House of Lords, so it's very likely to happen under the next government, really. But yes, massive constitutional change is likely to happen under the next government.
And also, as we come down to the end of this programme, I hope for our viewers watching, hopefully for you, you have a clear understanding of what the major political parties stand for as to relating to their policies if they were ever to come into government. So share with us how we should be praying and discerning regarding this election with 30 seconds to go.
Well, I'm really praying for God's mercy on the nation. We've turned so far away from God, and we deserve judgment, really. And I'm just begging God to be merciful to us as we approach a new government and this crucial time over this election. Who knows what will happen the next week ahead of the election? Anything could happen, all to pray for. Please pray for God to have mercy on us as a nation.
Thank you so much, Tim, for joining me on this election special, and I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. We can't tell you who you can vote for, but we can certainly tell you to look at the political manifestos of each political party, see where they line up in terms of biblical scriptures and moral stances, and then make a conscious decision to vote who you believe that God would favour the most. So I want to thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.